can you tell me where you had lived for 20 years?
Zhou, China.
So, which years did you live in Suzhou to and from continuously?
1973 when I was born and until I was 22.
And so, have you seen any major notable differences from when you were a younger child to before you left?
Oh yeah, I think I'm one of those person who experienced probably more changes, or not me, people in China, I guess, more changes in their lifetime than anybody, because when I was born, was in 1973. I don't have the statistics for 1973, but even in 1980, the poverty rate in China was 80%. So it was a very impoverished country at that time. They just started to open up the country, start the economic reform and such. And now you go back there, it's barely recognizable. It's as beautiful as any first-tier city in the U.S. and the environmental protection is not great yet, but I think it's getting there. And there's just a lot of it's a very prosperous, very convenient, cashless almost. Public bikes everywhere and they're free. Sophisticated public transportation system, great lifestyle, very easy and relaxed.
So what type of plants have you seen in Suzhou that aren't as commonly found here in the U.S.?
What type of plants?
Trees, grass.
Yeah. I don't know, it's kind of difficult. Well, bamboo, lots of bamboo. Lotus flower, which is something I really adore. It's part of the reason I love the lake so much, because it was a portion of the lake was covered with lotus blossom. In the summertime, you can ride your bicycle along the shore, and the fragrance from the lotus, it was just it just washes over you. That's two plants I think I don't see here much.
And what about animals?
What animal? Well, I mean, it's a small city, but it still have 8 million population. I mean, it's a city. I only see animals when I was in the zoo when I was growing up, so
that's different.
That's very different. We don't see deers or anything like that. There were not much woods. I mean, I live in the core of the city, so I didn't see much of that. I'm sure in the countryside it would be a little bit different.
What would you say the climate there was like?
Kind of similar to Bloomington, but a lot more humid.
What was your favorite part about living there?
There's a lot less snow. Favorite part living there? The lake.
Nice. Can you tell me a bit about the lake?
It was originally a small natural lake, and then because Xuzhou is a part of do you know the Great Canal of China? It actually goes through Xuzhou. It's one of the oldest, it's the oldest canal in the world that runs 1,700 kilometers long, and it passed from, anyway. But in Xuzhou, because the old canal has a lot of sand and mud accumulation, so it floods often. And then later on, the government decided to expand the lake to make it into a water reservoir. And my mother and my dad, actually, they were all part of it. Every student, I think at that time they were in middle school, every student, no matter which stage you are, and every employee in the city have helped to contribute to kind of expand this lake. And it become, I think if you walk around the lake, entire lake is 22 kilometers. It's beautiful.
Big.
It's very big. It's very well landscaped. Has a lot of pagodas, a lot of trees, jogging path along the way. It's so popular. The opera house is there now. It's so popular. About 10,000 people walk along the lake. They march along the lake with music. You probably saw that. It was something else as a form of exercise.
And what about the biodiversity within the lake?
That it's difficult to tell because I never fished there, but I know there's a lot of fish in there because I've seen people fishing there. One thing that's kind of disturbing, which is becoming a trend nowadays, I actually got into a kind of verbal dispute with a group of people. These are a group of Buddhists who they practice something called feng sheng, meaning they actually, it's a practice being grateful to nature and being mercy to all animals and living beings. But What they do, they buy fish from the supermarket and then they will set them into the lake. That is, they know it's illegal. They know that's forbidden because a lot of the ecological system in the lake has its own pattern. And when you set this fish, most of them just die anyway, but a lot of them may have caused more serious consequences down the road. I don't know what they are, but I remember in Chicago there one time someone set Asian carp into Michigan Lake, and it turned out to be a huge threat for the local ecological system. So anyway, that's one thing I did not enjoy watching.
Right. When you were a child, what was your favorite thing to do in terms of interacting with the outdoors?
Interacting with outdoors. There's not a whole lot of open fields, but we do have an area of open fields behind my elementary school. At that time, we lived very close to my elementary school. So my parents, my brother would all go out for walks at night, and then my parents will bring a flashlight, and then we will play with these frogs, because if you see the frogs, you shine the light in their eyes, they will not move. We also hunt for cicadas.
Before those are animals.
Well, they're kind of animals, yeah. And then before they actually, start to grow wings, I don't know what the process is called, and then climb into. Before that, this is when they're still dormanting. I think they're dormant for 7 years, right? So you can, especially after the rain, you can find breathing holes, and you can find these little holes if you're careful, and then we just take a little bit of glue in there, and we stick it in. It's a very sticky, special type of glue. I don't remember what it is now, on a stick, and you stick in there, and then you pull them out. And we'll actually take them home, and we lightly bread them, and then we deep fry them, and they're really yummy. You sprinkle a little salt and pepper over it. It's really good.
What activities did you like to do as a kid within the city?
Going to parks. I studied a lot. It's not that I'm not a fun kid. I wasn't a fun kid. I always wanted to go outside and have fun, but we just didn't have a lot of time. Even at that time, I remember academic pressure was so high. Even if you like drawing, you like play volleyball, you want to study piano or things like that, is viewed as you're not being a good kid because you're not academically driven. Your attention is diverted too much onto other things that's not important. So in a way, it's still the case right now. There's still a lot of academic pressure. I think if piano, if they did not used to have these gradings for students, past certain level, they get a certificate, I think the parents probably still wouldn't let their kids study piano. But now, because it looks good on their resume when they apply to certain schools, and that's one thing that looked good, maybe that's why the parents allow them to do such.
I know that a lot of people, when they think of China, one of the immediate thoughts is pollution. Would you say that the pollution in Zhou has gotten worse, gotten better, or has had no effect from the 20 years that you've been there?
Well, I think, when I was younger, the sky was definitely blue. As I left my hometown when I was 22, probably in the early 90s, I think that's when the pollution really started to pick up. And every year I returned, it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I would notice this difference in the sky color. At that time, I think pollution was not really a topic yet, but I noticed a difference in sky color. And I remember I asked my mom, I said, is that pollution or something? Why is it fog? And my parents will say, yeah, it's fog. But I remember when I was younger, back then when the economic development was not there yet, and the sky used to be blue.
Can you talk a little bit about how the farming industry and burning the crops, how that affects the
burning
pollution?
The crops? Actually, every June, I remember every June when I go back, there will be a nightmare period that all the farmers will be burning the I don't know if they're crops or they're wheat, stems of wheat. So after they cut down the wheat, they don't use the stem anymore. I think the farmers find the easiest ways to burn them. But that's been forbidden ever since I can remember. But every year they still burn it. It's really difficult to punish everybody when everybody does it.
And how do you think that affects the environment?
I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. I think the problem with that right now is that the government doesn't come up with a strategy to help the farmers to, at least come up with some sort of a subsidy to help them to deal with. I don't necessarily know what is the better way to deal with these the stems of the wheat, but that's a huge problem, and they have been dealing with it with fining the farmers. But if they catch everybody does it and everyone resists, and so that's difficult to push through. And they have been firing the executives of the village, but then the next person comes on, and then the farmers do it all over again. So it's not being very effective.
So you said that you saw a change within the sky and the pollution levels in your city. Were there any other kind of drastic changes that affected ways of living?
I think the city definitely looks cleaner. I think the education campaign really helped as well. I think people paying more attention to their habit of spitting, littering, and things like that. Also, a lot of old endangered neighborhood. I wouldn't call it endangered, the old neighborhood that was a building that's not safe to live in. The government had putting a lot of funding to demolish those areas and then build new high-risers on these areas, so that people can move into more of a cleaner, safer, and then greener neighborhood. Believe it or not, because before it was really just, it looks like a poverty-drenched area. So now they have public parks and etc. And they're doing a lot of education campaign to educate people the negative effect of not very hygienic habits.
Right, that's good. Is there any negative change that you've seen?
Negative change I've seen, yes. I think young people are increasingly get driven by materialism. I know that my brother's family have 2 cars. Their family of 3, they have 2 cars, and because in China they try to eliminate pollution, so they try to eliminate the amount of cars on the road every day. So what they do, they actually have this system in many cities in China. They do this. If your license plate ends in an odd number, you can be on the street on the odd day of the week, like a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Saturday and Sunday, everyone can be on the road. And if your license plate ends in the even number, you can be on the road on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Sunday is a free day for everyone. So in order to combat this problem, they bought 2 vehicles. And then I think that's very common for younger generation now. And I really don't think, because in Zhou, the public transportation system is very sophisticated. I mean, you can find buses at midnight. And then the buses come every 5-10 minutes. You really don't need to have a car. But young people, young generation, they like to compare with each other. They like to, I remember I asked my brother, why did you buy your car anyway? Well, instead of saying, oh, maybe I want to take my family picnic to the countryside, instead of that, and he goes, oh, because my assistant bought a better car. So, I mean, they recently purchased a Mercedes, and I asked him, and that's after they sold their pretty good car. I think they had Audi before this one. And I said, why did you do that? Your car was running great. It was beautiful. He said, because my assistant got a new car. So it's keeping up to the Jones, or even keeping up to your neighbor. And I think young people are doing a lot of these things instead of, my brother's family is very typical Chinese family for the young generation. They work all the time. I think this year during Spring Festival, my brother took his first holiday and then actually traveled overseas. Before that, he only traveled overseas for work. I think about 20 years.
Were there any lifestyle changes that you noted?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was growing up, I remember during the summertime, it was so hot, I would be lying, we would be sleeping on the balcony on the straw mat because it was so hot inside. Nobody had air conditioner. I remember the first time my neighbor had a refrigerator. They were the first one. At that time, everything was ration. So you can't even buy a fridge even if you have money, because there were just so few of them around in the country. I remember they bought their first refrigerator, and then his family dumped a whole bucket of apples in the freezer and then froze it, because we never seen a frozen apple before. I mean, you had ice cream, but who freeze apple to sell them, right? And I thought it was just a most crazy thing. Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, we didn't have a television. I remember I grew up, I shouldn't have memory with this, but I do. I remember I moved away from our old, like just a one room, like 4 of us living in one room. We didn't have kitchen, it was just one room with a dirt floor. We didn't have electronics. That's how everybody is. That's why the poverty rate was probably in 1970s was higher than 80%. I remember the first day, some government official came with electric wire and then said, okay, where do you want the wire? And my father pointed at the wall over our bed and said, over there. And I remember that was put there, and a few days later, a little speaker was installed. And then my father said, every 6 o'clock in the morning, we're going to hook up this wire. It was just 2 exposed wire, one already hooked, the other one was made into a ring, and a hook, you hook onto it to turn on the radio. And
that sounds dangerous.
It's not like a wireless radio, it's a wired radio. I don't know how it worked at that time, but it's a very low voltage. I mean, just a speaker. And I remember that 6 o'clock in the morning, my father would put that hook on, and I hear the da dee da da dee da da dee da da da. It's like a wake up call, I guess. And it's a children's program at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'll listen to it. And I moved away from that place when I was 4.5 years old. So I had memory of that before I was 4.5 years old. So it was that was a life that I lived. And then before I moved away, when I was 22, I mean, we had 3-bedroom apartment. It was tile floor. We had air conditioning every room. We had a kitchen. It's not like westernized kitchen. It's not very big, but a very functional kitchen. We had gas stove. Every Western comfort, washing machine. We had them. So there was quite a change. And it's not just for our family. I think every family in China went through that drastic transformation.
Yeah, it probably followed the economic, social, and political changes that were also happening during that time period.
Right.
Well, thank you for letting me interview you. I got lots of interesting responses.
Well, it was fun for me too.